We're going to get started then. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second Ateneos panel for fourth year. This space is designed to promote academic exchange and showcase the research and reflections of our students, those who have developed throughout the course. Today's panel features 3 presentations that delve into topics ranging from linguistic markers of mental health to innovative approaches in language teaching and the intersection of visual and literary arts. So each speaker will have up to 13 minutes to present. If time allows, we will open the floor for questions and comments at the end. So we're going to get started with Eden. You can't spell depression without I, an inquiry into the use of the first-person pronoun as a linguistic marker of depression. Eden explores how the use of first-person pronouns in language may serve as indicators of depressive states. Her presentation draws on linguistic research and psychological studies to examine how language reflects emotional and mental health. So I give the floor to you. Thank you so much. We are going to share the presentation. Yes. Just a minute. Here we are, and there it is. Yeah, great. Okay.
Hi. You can spell depression without I, an inquiry into the use of the first-person pronoun as a linguistic marker of depression. Introduction. Depression is a common mental disorder that can result in a change in one's lifestyle as a result of all-consuming feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and in some cases, suicidal ideation. It can negatively affect personal relationships, work, school performance, and executive functioning. However, there is one aspect that has particularly interested those in the field of natural language processing, NLP, and that is shifts in linguistic style as a consequence of depression, specifically function words. Function words reveal characteristics of a speaker's linguistic style, which simultaneously gives away details about the speaker's social abilities. This is because the majority of language functions are developed in the temporal and frontal lobes, where most social skills and emotions are housed. Because of this, for years, authors have been looking into how depression and other mental illnesses can have an impact on a person's linguistic style. The most studied linguistic feature in depression patients being the subjective first-person singular pronoun, I. This paper aims to provide an overview of the main findings on the first-person singular pronoun as a linguistic marker of depression and how this relates to the manifestation of the disorder. The presented findings may vary depending on factors such as chosen methodological framework, corpora, subjects, and linguistic variables. One of the main concepts of understanding the language depression. One of the main concepts explored in these investigations is that of self-focused attention, which I will call SFA. This refers to a self-directed attention to internal bodily activity and awareness of one's attitude and behavior instead of to external information. In the early 1980s, social psychologist Thomas Besinski and psychology professor Jeff Greenberg suggested that SFA presented a particular association to depression, considering the process of repetitive negative thinking patterns that is characteristic of people with this disorder. Furthermore, these authors expanded on the idea that depressed individuals tend to perseverate on negative self-criticism, which can be the result of a thwarted goal, such as losing a job, failing an exam, or going through a breakup. Due to a deficit in social-emotional processing, depressed patients fall into a cycle of increased self-focus after negative events, but little attention toward themselves after positive events. This tendency to focus on failure is speculated to occur because of several reasons. It takes less effort to maintain a negative self-concept than to construct a positive one. It protects the individual from future failures. And finally, it provides an easy explanation for further disappointments. The most heavily studied type of SFA is rumination and its role in depression, which is predominant in the presented NLP investigations. Rumination is defined as a pattern of responses to distress in which individuals passively and persistently focus on themselves their symptoms, as well as possible causes and consequences of these symptoms. This can be caused by an unresolved discrepancy between a person's goals and their current state, triggering a stress-induced rumination that challenges regulation and leads to persistent negative self-focus. These two ideas are key to understanding the connection between self-referential language and depression, since this constant internal focus present in the depressed people is manifested in an increase of first-person singular pronouns. The frequency with which a person refers to themselves can reflect their degree of SFA and even predict the onset of a disorder. The following studies take into account the results of participants' self-focused attention and rumination assessments to analyze how their linguistic style may be affected and whether or not it can be an indicator of depression. Methodology, some results. Machine learning in natural language processing has introduced new insights into symptomatology in mental health. Moreover, developments in new technologies have allowed the expansion of these studies into faster and more detailed results. This section examines the different methodologies that have been applied in research related to linguistic markers of depression, most of which result in a prevalence of the use of first-person singular pronouns. The methodology of these investigations has ranged depending on the chosen framework, but overall, the main sources of text analysis for linguistic features of depression have been social media posts, essays, interviews, and even artistic content. An article by Sean W. Kelly and Claire M. Gillian analyzed data from 946 users on Twitter who had reported having gone through depressive episodes as well as recurring depressive symptoms. The 9 assessed text features included content words as well as function words, with results indicating that the ones positively associated with depression severity were articles, negative emotion words, first-person singular pronouns, word words, and negations. Interestingly, the use of articles provided the most significant association to depression severity, even more than negative emotion words. A similar study was carried out in 2018, this time using data from the original footprint of 683 Facebook statuses, 114 of whom had a depression diagnosis. The investigation analyzed posts from the 6 months prior to the first diagnosis to detect prediction accuracy of future depression diagnosis through a built predictive model and the linguistic inquiry and word count software. The results presented a higher use of first-person singular pronouns in users who eventually were diagnosed with depression, as well as content words related to physical pain, health concerns, and medical references. It is worth noting that this study observed more content words than function words in comparison to the previous investigation, yet subjective first-person singular pronouns remained prominent. Furthermore, other studies required the composition of texts by the analyzed patients. In one case, college students were asked to write an essay with the prompt, "Write about your deepest thoughts and feelings about coming to college." The authors chose this particular prompt in an attempt to replicate past investigations that had resulted in a positive association between depressed persons and an increase in the use of first-person singular pronouns. The participants were classified among currently depressed, formerly depressed, and never depressed, depending on their self-report measures of current depression symptoms, which were assessed through questionnaires. Results stated that depressed individuals used significantly more first-person singular words than did never depressed individuals, as well as more negative emotion words. However, this investigation revealed even more interesting details about the linguistic tendencies of formerly depressed students whose use of I words increased only during the third segment of the essays. Furthermore, these participants presented conflict, expressing negative emotions and a greater focus on self-evaluation. The authors believe this is because depression-vulnerable individuals actively suppress depressive processing as a strategy for keeping depression at bay. Finally, some studies have been interested in the manifestation of linguistic symptoms of depression in art and culture. In the United States, popular song lyrics appear to adopt a more self-focused approach as scores on the depression scale rose towards the year 2007. Through the previously mentioned linguistic inquiry and word count program, researchers recognized that popular song lyrics include fewer words related to community and social interactions, including an increase in the first-person singular pronoun. among other features such as negative emotion words. This discussed that psychological processes and cultural products manually reinforce each other to remain in agreement with generational changes in psychological traits, goals, and emotions. Findings and discussion. Several characteristics can be observed in the linguistic style of depressed individuals, but I talk, as some authors refer to the frequent use of the first-person singular pronouns, is believed to be the most adequate marker of depression. A thorough report by Alison Tachman looks into the diagnostic predictive potential of this part of speech. Tachman explains that I talk is difficult to censor, while content word use and frequency is easier to manipulate by the subject, obstructing the analysis of their subconscious processes. This is crucial in NLP's investigations since depressed individuals may try to alter aspects of their language use to conceal their depression from others, as a result of the negative stigma around mental health. For this reason, the presented findings focus almost exclusively on first-person pronouns, among other function words. Tachman's report also makes a distinction between the results of subjective, objective, and possessive first-person singular pronouns. The findings in this study observed a positive correlation between depression and all first-person singular pronouns except for the possessive type. Tachman highlights that possessive first-person singular pronouns capture a form of self-referential language where the focus is on the relationship between the self and something else, a person, object, or event, while the subjective and objective forms offer a language where the focus is fully on the self in isolation, reflecting the previously mentioned self-focused attention. Furthermore, some studies have provided a comparative approach between the first-person singular pronoun I and first-person plural pronouns, especially as a result of social phenomena. An example of this came as a consequence of the World Trade Center attacks in 2001, which caused major distress all over the world. A 2004 investigation analyzed the online public journal diaries of 1,084 users from the United States, spanning from the 2 months before and after the attacks. This study aimed to compare the linguistic style of the users in connection with the psychological repercussions of the event. What is interesting about this investigation is that a decrease in the use of the first-person singular pronoun and an increase in the plural form was observed as a result of the shared traumatic experience. A similar NLP research was carried out centering on the death of beloved Princess Diana. The authors Stone and Pennebaker explained that during the first week following her death, people spoke less about themselves as individuals and were more likely to become collective in their language. This suggests that even though first-person singular pronouns can be an indicator of depression, shared traumatic events bring people together through their grief, displaying a decrease in the use of singular form and an increase in the plural. Lastly, it is worth noting that the described linguistic features are not exclusive in English speakers. The Brazilian Journal of Psychiatry examines whether findings on English speakers can be replicated in languages with different grammatical rules. For example, Brazilian Portuguese differs from English in that it doesn't always require a subject pronoun. Actually, first-person pronouns are used around 60% of the time, along with the verb in written or oral speech. This research analyzed solely the singular and plural forms of the first-person pronoun in individuals with major depressive disorder, called MDD, and non-MDD individuals. Effectively, depressed participants exhibited a significantly more frequent use of the singular pronoun than the non-MDD participants, suggesting that it indeed might constitute a promising linguistic marker for depression among youths who speak Brazilian Portuguese. Conclusion: there is substantial evidence that draws a positive correlation between high frequency of first-person singular pronouns and individuals with depression. And with the development of new technologies, NLP might eventually achieve effective and reliable diagnostic predictability. Observing the unconscious choice of words in other individuals can provide an accessible insight into understanding when a loved one might be in need of professional help or a shoulder to lean on. Additionally, multiple studies look into other disorders, such as bipolar disorder, eating disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorders, which present linguistic features specific to the individual's symptoms. Moreover, research expands on other words that can constitute a person's linguistic style, depending on psychopathology, such as articles, abstract words, and negations. Further research could review the connection between articles and depression, since it is another powerful indicator, but isn't as exhaustively researched. In many of the previously mentioned studies, the frequency of articles and abstract words had similar results to those of first-person singular pronouns. However, the psychological processes that contribute to them might vary. There is still much scope to be covered in the relationship between psychopathology and linguistic style. Nevertheless, current developments prove future NLP research to be quite promising. The evolution of these investigations remain to be unveiled, but its potential is certain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eden. You see how the study of language, the study of structures, for example, in this case, may contribute for other sciences such as psychology. So thank you so much. We're going to move on. Yes. Now another contribution of grammar, but now regarding teaching beyond grammar, the benefits of applying the lexical approach to ESL lessons for adult learners. So Micaela presents the advantages of using the lexical approach in teaching English as a second language, particularly for adult learners. Her work highlights how focusing on chunks of language and real-life usage can enhance fluency and learner engagement. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you so much for the floor. I'm going to be presenting my paper, which is titled Teaching Beyond Grammar, the Benefits of Applying the Lexical Approach to ESL Lessons for Adult Learners. I can read it, but I can't speak, or I can write an email, but I don't know how to talk with others. These are common phrases heard during a first lesson with an adult ESL learner when asking about the reasons for taking or picking up English lessons. Nowadays, adult learners' goals go beyond the need of mastering grammar or written production. In a society governed by oral communication that constantly demands authenticity and immediacy, the main need among learners is to be able to communicate effectively. There was a time, however, when this need was hardly addressed in formal education. For many decades, the ESL classroom was dominated by grammar-centered instruction, with focus on accuracy and structure over fluency and speech competence. Even though these approaches provide learners with necessary tools and frameworks that shape their use of the language, it is rarely enough to equip learners to face real-world situations and conversations. The lexical approach, pioneered by Michael Lewis, enters a paradigm to challenge these preceding notions. Revolutionizing the world of teaching by introducing the concept of grammaticalized lexis, this approach seeks to remove the ongoing focus on grammar structures as a true way of acquiring language, shining a light on the results achieved by shifting the process and prioritizing lexis instead. This is achieved by emphasizing the importance of acquiring language in lexical chunks, collocations, and prefabricated phrases. This new take by Lewis offers a practical way for learners to gain confidence, fluency, and foster the acquisition of meaning, authentic, and natural language. The aim of this article is to explore the lexical approach proposed by Michael Lewis and evaluate its application on adult learners of English as a second language to assert its effectiveness. To do so, this piece of writing goes over the basic notions of the approach in its comparison to traditional approaches, as well as describes the targeted group regarding their needs, objectives, and aspirations. This article focuses solely on the benefits found in the application of this approach regarding speech production and the enhancement of communicative competence in comparison to the use of traditional or grammar-based approaches. Regarding my analysis, well, it's true that traditional grammar instruction offers structure more often than not it falls short in promoting fluency and natural language use. When taking a traditional approach, language is primarily taught based on grammatical constructions. Vocabulary then takes a second place and is learned in units or established sets, commonly divided into themes rather than considering frequency or usage. In addition, most practice or opportunities to put this learned language into action involve written production or a focus on reading comprehension. Whereas this does guarantee to a degree the acquisition of the language, it proves of little help over the acquisition of fluency and natural speech competence. Structural rigidity fosters a gap between knowing about the language and knowing how to use it. And this is what the lexical approach seeks to reduce. Pioneered by Michael Lewis and Dave Willis in the 90s, the lexical approach challenges long-standing assumptions about language teaching and what is meant to take place inside a classroom. Within a lexical approach, language is considered a comprise of prefabricated expressions and phrases, usually referred to as lexical units or chunks. This means that the language ceases to be analyzed in terms of sentence-level grammatical structures and starts being constructed over prefabricated expressions that are acquired. In Lewis's words, language consists of grammaticalized lexis, not lexicalized grammar. This formulation does not only argue against decades of linguistic and teaching tradition, but also redefines what it actually means to know a language at all. In primary development stages of this approach, these lexical units consisted solely on individual vocabulary or multi-word combinations. Progressively, it expanded to the point where it began including compound nouns, phrasal verbs, idioms, collocations, and institutionalized phrases. Criteria regarding difficulty also varied. Lexical chunks can be grouped over fixedness or compositionality. Fixedness is the degree to which a multi-word expression allows substitutions, inflections, and so forth. While compositionality, on the other hand, is the degree to which a phrase reveals its true meaning through the individual analysis of its words. Knowing and considering these terms when selecting material helps educators prioritize the teaching of expressions that may be both frequent and ambiguous or opaque, reducing the chances of learners misinterpreting meaning when solely relying on inference. In practice, this means that learners will be able to prioritize chunks over the construction of more transparent expressions that can be learned later in the process. In his book, The Lexical Approach, The State of ELT and the Way Forward, Lewis exposes other relevant conditions that affect how material should be selected. He considered that to build a proper syllabus, educators needed to take into account three main factors: inclusions, exclusions, and sequences. To do so, the teacher has to consider the inclusion of a large body of vocabulary no matter the level of the courses, focusing on a balanced sequencing of high frequency and pragmatically useful items. The only material which is to be excluded is which is not identified, not valued, and not prioritized. This systematic selection ensures that each unit introduces relevant resources, external pressures such as family, employment, or the social environment, which demands for a more flexible, practical, and efficient approach that can deliver communicative outcomes in a short time frame. In this sense, the lexical approach serves as a response to the realities of adult education, a universe in which time constraints and wavering motivation can lead to a dropout if not met with immediate communicative results. Prioritization of readiness and meaning over structural perfection is the most effective way to meet these requirements. The use of chunks provides learning with immediate, usable language. This helps reduce the cognitive load during interactions. For example, if a learner needed to say, "Tell me all you know about," it would be easier for them to just out of the chunk spill the tea, which is both idiomatic and contextually appropriate if it were to be used on daily conversation with friends or family members, instead of having to construct said sentence while taking into account the structure and fitting words or necessary words. This shift allows learners to participate with more fluency and confidence, and it gives them greater chances to participate in exchanges, even when their accuracy continues to develop. In addition, focusing on lexical chunks exposes learners to a cultural and pragmatic dimension of the language. As mentioned before, the use of idiomatic expressions, collocations, similes, and institutionalized expressions tend to carry specific meaning that most times cannot be deduced solely from grammar. This exposure proves crucial for adult learners who operate in professional or intercultural environments and need to acquire ready-to-use language or expressions, thereby also gaining insight into social norms and communicative strategies using the type language. Another point in favor of this approach for this specific group of learners is its focus on interaction. The application of interactive tasks such as fluency drills or even role plays may be sometimes associated with kids or stereotyped as childish. However, they prove highly effective not only to integrate lexical items into real-life communication, but also help learners gain confidence and motivation through tangible process. If they can see the results of their efforts apply beyond pre-made or written exercise and into diverse and less predictable instances of communication, They are more likely to be motivated and feel more comfortable taking risks while testing different structures or lexical units in order to get the message through. Ultimately, the lexical approach ends up having a deeper effect than just transforming a syllabus. It makes learning an instance of meaningful participation and transformation rather than a mechanical practice. As final thoughts, the evidence of notions presented in this analysis suggests that the lexical approach goes beyond a pedagogical motivation. It is a paradigm shift for effective language teaching. Traditional instructions, grammatical emphasis, though relatively effective on other groups of learners, more often than not creates a critical disconnect between knowledge of the theory and the ability to use it, which can fuel discontent and discouragement on adult learners. The lexical approach bridges this gap by offering a framework that focuses on grammaticalized lexis instead, prioritizing meaning and immediate communication. By focusing on high-frequency lexical chunks, collocation, and institutionalized phrases, the lexical approach matches perfectly with adult learners' core needs: efficiency, tangible process, and applicability. This challenge of perspective minimizes the cognitive burden and fosters spontaneous interaction, allowing learners to build confidence and achieve satisfactory communicative outcomes that match their final objectives. Moving forward, integrating this approach will require more than just adapting or updating textbooks. Teacher training and modifications in curriculum design will need to take place in order to successfully leave this approach room to grow. Educators must be equipped with both physical and pedagogical tools, not only to deliver the lessons, but to plan them as well, teaching them how to recognize and prioritize lexical chunks to make authentic and memorable listening. In the end, adopting this approach represents a commitment to leave behind the teaching of language as a system of abstract rules and start teaching it as a living communication tool it is. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing, Micaela. So I'm going to share the next presentation before introducing Evie, who is our next speaker. And yeah, we are right.
The other tab.
Which one?
No.
Okay. Thank you so much. Excellent. So we're gonna share. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Very good. So we're going to go on with Evie's presentation, Mixing Arts, the use of expresses in literature. So Evie examines the literary device of expresses, the vivid description of visual art within literary texts. Her presentation explores how this technique bridges artistic disciplines and enriches narrative expression. I give the floor to you.
I will read my paper named Mixing Arts, the use of expresses in literature. Creating art. The pursuit for a proper definition of art has been a struggle for as long as the concept has been in use. Attempting to set limits on something which provokes or intends to provoke feelings in both creators and spectators can be no easy challenge. In fact, the last sentence might encompass the greatest challenges of the definition in itself. Firstly, the question of how someone can move endless ways in which people choose to express themselves. And secondly, the paradox of generalizing a definition of something that is inherently unique for each human being. What is undeniable is the fact that art strikes us in a special way, and it tends to remain in our memories for longer than any other information. This may help explain the abundance of intertextuality present across artistic forms and expressions. We resort endlessly to the flesh of textualities in which we exist to create, seeking to enrich and intensify the experience of our spectators. How much richer does the reading of Mrs. Weiser-Gasso's City become if we recognize a parallel with Bronte's Jane Eyre? Similarly, the Shrek gain a new significance as soon as we find the parody to Disney's characters. Motives and thoughts may be different, but the truth is that intertextuality is everywhere. It might be in human nature that when we are stirred by art, we feel moved to create a response. Whether the feeling was positive or negative would depend on more subtleties of life than one that encompasses in the work. The responses draw from everything we encounter. Authors draw from the readings to create metaphors, and painters borrow shades to create a new Venus. Essentially, from quotation to pastiche, even translation can be interpreted as an instance of intertextuality. When interdisciplinary intertextuality is dealt with, literature seems to be the root of all creations. From the Bible came to exist Da Vinci's Last Supper. And thanks to Dracula, we can now enjoy Nosferatu. From Hugo's Les Miserables emerged the eponymous musical. All this gives us the opportunity to look at literary beasts through the lens of other works, and through another artist's interpretation. But why does it appear uncommon that this phenomenon happens in the opposite direction? Why do we fail to expect a narrator, who is often meticulous in their descriptions, to encounter a painting and reflect on it? If we venture to look into these reflections, we will find that those words about an image constitute an instance of ekphrasis. Although it comes from the Greek word for description, the use of this figure can achieve more than a mere characterization, since it allows an interdisciplinary conversation between the visual and literary works of art. The aim of this paper is to shed a light on this rhetorical device to promote its recognition as much as its use. In order to achieve such purpose, it deals with the construction of the literary feature and the effects brought upon the reader from its use. Disobedient intertextuality. Ekphrasis has been described as a disobedient instance of intertextuality, going further than just referring to a work of art and attempting to intertwine two distinct forms of art in a single text. To do so, it constantly pushes the barrier between the stillness of visual arts and the flow of literature. The mixture stands a rebellion towards the constructions of each form, coming alive of a painting. Not coincidentally, these attempts to use literature to bring life were inspired by the epigrams of monuments and graves, where words were used to evoke those honor who could no longer attest or death endure. The disobedience of the description lies in its combination of both description itself and narrative, where it is not of itself but being a mere recount of the shapes and figures of a painting, but goes further into the situation actively happening within, and furthermore, the experience of observing said painting. In such a manner, ekphrasis is a rhetorical strategy that allows reflection on the art of observing art and the interpretation gained from the action, while providing a detailed description of the actual observable features of the work. Historic accounts for the use of ekphrasis refer back to the Hellenistic period, when, one could argue, the retelling of paintings was the only accessible way to see them without traveling great distances. Besides the historical relevance of these descriptions, the educational position given to ekphrasis in the period was of the utmost importance, since it gave an orator the skill of energia, the ability to make something visible. To achieve this energia, a narrator needs to pose their gaze on the work of art, and to illustrate such action, make a distinctive reference to what is being observed. More often than not, would one resort to alluding a famous or memorable feature of the painting first, for the reader to evoke the image we are proposing to dissect. Such strategy is used, for instance, by Anne Sexton, who started her poem with, "The town does not exist, except where one black-haired tree slips, up like a drowned woman into the sky, to bring Van Gogh's Starry Night to the mind of her readers." Such as any other intertextual case, for ekphrasis to be entirely successful, one needs to retrieve a vivid image from the sea of text existing in the mind of the audience, or at least create an image vivid enough for the audience to believe it to come from their own senses. Besides energia, authors need to achieve a fantasia, which refers to a vivid mental image inside the audience's mind, and serves to create a transferable mind image. The achievement of this objective entails undeniably a proper description. The inclusion of details of features and colors is essential to the building of an ekphrasis of an ekphrastic text. It is the sole anchor of the text to the image. This is why, after the first gaze is set upon the work of art, the narrator is drawn to give details based on their observation, from stroke of paint that sits more heavily on the canvas than others, to how colors are combined. Every speck of paint pen mentioned brings words more alive and turn the writing more memorable. The experience of watching the work should transpire from the page to the sense of the reader, and these senses must go inevitably further than only sight. The reader needs to feel the texture, the sunlight beam, the orchids and their perfume, and the murmuring of people around the narrator. Authors then need to resort to different figures of speech, metaphors and synecdoche, along with symbolism and metonymy, as many as they need to push the sensory limits of a written work. When the description is vivid enough, the listener becomes a slave, since they become entrapped in a reality which was created and perceived not directly by them, but through the narrator's voice. According to Goldhill, this phenomenon of enslaving the listener is a visualization, which deprives the listener from their power of analysis by overflowing them with sensations. This process means to engulf the audience into a realism where objects can no longer be classified among those which are real and those which are fictive, because through the use of ekphrasis, some belong to both. The objective, further than just evoking a mental image, is to make readers or viewers in such a way that the author's observation becomes their own. Since observations can never be neutral, descriptions are often loaded with emotional language, and this is done to capture a visceral personal response to the artwork. Structures become filled up with the experiences of the author when encountering the piece, and thus the enthrallment of the viewer became the enthrallment of the would-be viewer. Through this tainted description, the author becomes the owner of the truth by allowing the audience to gain the agency to build upon their interlocutor's experience. Repainted meaning. It becomes inevitable, once inside literature, for the artwork to maintain its independence and original significance. In such a manner, it is in the hands of the author to rework it and find innovative ways not to simply refer to the works, but to interact with them. This repainting of meaning is done in two ways: seeing and making of art inside literature. The seeing becomes especially relevant when we reflect on the visual arts, since it is through observation that we can choose what to focus on, which stimulus to absorb and which to ignore. In such a process, we inevitably reframe the object to make our choices the most judicious. How else do we justify the omission of all those details we choose to ignore? When we encounter ekphrasis, then, authors must persuade us that their looking has been the worthiest of consideration. In fact, where we might have no access to the original artwork, the only one worth having. By claiming ownership over reality, they are able to dramatize the moment of observation, and allow the moment to dramatize us as observers. Just as the viewers are allowed to pick in Velázquez Las Meninas, we as readers are suddenly allowed to spot within poetry and prose. The dramatization allows for all viewers to become part of the same community. There arises a sense of belonging, as such of a young learner arriving to class on the first day, a stranger to all of those around them, the confidence of their belonging to the group regardless. In this process, the author gets to impose a new meaning not only on the painting, but on the viewers, who become a piece for judgment in their hands. Their dramatization of the art, observation, allows for the author to teach their audience to look at an artwork in a certain way. They present looking as an act of interpreting, of reading, a way of seeing meaning. And suddenly, with the narrator unceasingly reflecting on the work before their eyes, the teaching lies on a single concept. You should not stand and stare awestruck before art. You should stand firm and speak. Art should produce commentary. Moving on to the making of art, the literary process differs greatly from the one described before, since it traces the artwork back to the beginning, its original creation. To reach the making of art, it is necessary for the author to reflect even further, not only on his own observation of the artwork, but on those of the original, if there is such thing as an original, artist who chose to depict but a portion of the reality they could observe. When the author chooses to extend their power beyond the literary work onto the visual piece, the fantasia grows even bigger. The reader becomes trapped in more than one dimension. To achieve this making of the piece, the author needs to recreate the situation which inspired the artwork, challenging the ontological grounds of reality. The reader is drawn from their own reality, firstly, to the scenes of the narrator observation, and then into the life of the one who created the artwork. In such a process, the situation plays out between the existing figure of the artist and the fictional figure of the subject of the artwork. What makes the situation more complex is the fact that both become fictional within the author's narrative. By endeavoring into his art of creation, the author follows the path of a shaping ekphrastic process which changes the essence of the original artwork. If the author is successful, they will install in the reader's mind a new perspective on the meaning behind the piece, which would have been inaccessible otherwise. Furthermore, once the boundaries of the real and the fictional have fallen to the ground, the reader is forced to reconsider the power of narratives. Thoughts on a canvas. Ekphrasis allows for both reader and authors to make a reflection on the narratives that load the visual arts with meaning. In this way, the resignification does not deprive the original creation from its relevance, but enhance its artistic power in action, being able to thrill and permeate even without being seen. Furthermore, the sentiment of belonging that arises from ekphrasis readers is not to be undermined. In an age where individuality and loneliness seem to be pervading all aspects of society, this quality of the device seems to foster the idea that we are all united in and through the experience of art. Lastly, the appearance and recognition of ekphrasis is a call for action on the part of authors, an invitation to delve into the innumerable stories that may lay behind a single artwork. The lesson to be learned, as has been stated previously, is that artworks are supposed to evoke commentary, to force reflection and force our creativity to immortalize the workings of our minds. Thank you.
So much, Evie, Eden, and Michaela, for your insightful and thought-provoking presentations. Does anyone have any questions? Would you like to make any comments? I mean, you have delivered such original, yes, presentations. Yeah,
Yeah, I have a question.
go ahead.
Edie, how did you come up with this topic?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same. What moved you to write? Each of you, I'd like to ask the same to each.
I was preparing my final for English literature, and I was reading a book called How to Be Both, which deals very deeply with different paintings by Francesco del Cosa. And this rhetorical device was appearing constantly. And when I started looking for papers for my final presentation, I found one with that. It's in the references
Yeah.
by Chion that deals with how in postmodern societies, it is very often that we forget the ability that we have to create art and the combination of different kinds of art. I really like that topic. When I did the final, I had the feeling that I had something left to say about it, and I took the opportunity.
Chance. Thank you so much.
Yeah, the
Okay.
three of them were
Yeah.
very original.
What about the?
Yeah.
What about me?
Yeah.
I decided to write about the lexical approach after a seminar I took with you.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. And when we covered that topic in class, I realized that I really wanted to know more about it because it was a time where I felt stuck in my lessons with my students. And even though I focused my paper on adult learners, I really wanted to deepen my knowledge on the topic. So I decided to go for it and write a paper. It was the only way to force myself to investigate.
And I want to know about Eden as well, because it's really very, interesting, very interesting, and well, it has this psychological side
Yeah.
that is so
Mhm. I'm writing-
important.
I was planning on writing my dissertation on the reflection of Virginia Woolf's bipolar disorder on her writing. And Gabby, our methodology tutor, told me that she'd read a really interesting article on the connection between mental health and linguistics. And I just thought it was really interesting to go deeper into it.
Yeah, first time I've heard of it. Yeah,
Very interesting.
it's very.
Thank you so much.
Very-
Any other comments or questions? So we thank you again. This is just a sample of our work, academic work, yes, in class, and we look forward to going on with future sessions, okay? So thank you so much for being such a kind audience, okay? We hope to see you again next time. No, I don't know, next year, next time. Thank you so much.